Building an app with AI in 2026 is either the easiest thing you've ever done or a complete nightmare. And the difference comes down to whether or not you're following a process or you just start vibe coding at 2 in the morning. Now what I'm going to do in this video is give you a 9-stage roadmap that you can follow anytime you want to build something with AI. This is going to go over planning, deployment, tech stack, how you can test the app, how you can make sure that you actually get something out there that's going to be usable and you don't need to restart every time the AI model goes rogue. So with that said, let's get into the roadmap here. All of the timestamps will be available from the video player down below. Let's begin. Stage number 1 is to figure out what it is you actually want to build. Now this is the most important phase because especially when you're writing code with AI, you really need to know what you actually want. If you don't know what the finished product should look like, it's going to be very difficult to build that, and AI can completely go rogue and really get off the rails and start developing something that you never asked for and that you don't need. So there's 3 main questions that you need to be able to answer at this stage. The first question is, what problem is my application going to solve? Any good software application ultimately solves some type of problem. You need to figure out what that problem is and be able to state that clearly in just one sentence. Now, question number 2, who is this for? So who's your key avatar? Who's actually going to use this application? Is it you? Is it your mom? Is it students? Is it a doctor? It doesn't matter, but you need to know who the key user is because that's going to allow you to plan it out a lot better. And then question 3, what does done mean? What I mean by this is at what stage would you decide that this application is finished being built? Does this mean that you can upload a PDF and you get an AI analysis for it? Does this mean that 100 doctors are using your application? Does this mean that it works on your local computer or it's fully deployed so anyone around the world can use it? What are you trying to build, right? What problem does it solve? Who is it for? And when is it going to be complete? If you can answer those 3 questions, you already have a pretty good sense of what it is that you want to build, and then we can move on to stage 2. Now, stage 2 is to start planning out your application and picking your tech stack. Once you have a general sense of what you want to build and you've answered those 3 questions, what you need to start doing now is coming up with a detailed plan so that when you start giving this to AI, you know exactly what you're going to build, in what order, and importantly, what technology stack you're going to use. Now at this stage, what your goal needs to be is to think through your application in more detail. So you might want to have a quick wireframe where you draw out what you want the user interface to look like. You want to have a spec list where you go over different features or requirements of your application. And then most importantly, you want to decide the technical stack that you're going to be using. So this means, what are you going to use for the front end? What are you going to use for the back end? What are you going to use for the database? And how are you going to deploy it? Now don't worry if you don't know all of the different options here. What I would highly suggest you do is actually communicate with an AI model, have the AI model ask you questions, and go back and forth with it continuously for at least 30 or 45 minutes where you start planning out and having the AI model question all of your decisions. For example, if you want to create a social media platform, what type of social media platform is it going to be? How many users should it be able to handle? What kind of media is going to be posted? Should you have comments? Should you be able to follow people? Should you have direct messages, right? Those are the types of things that you want to know before you start building that an AI model can assist you with. So what I'm going to do right now is actually share my screen and I'll show you exactly how you can run through this process to get a decent spec. So I've just opened up Claude here, but you could use anything that you want. And I'm going to show you exactly how I would go through this process of creating a simple spec. I'll keep it short, but it will give you kind of a sense of how I'm going to do this. So I would start by just dictating directly into Claude and say something like, hey, I am trying to build a social media platform specifically for influencers where we can share different brand deals that we're getting, strategies, trends that we're noticing, etc. I would like you to ask me different questions about this platform and start developing a spec document that I could pass to an AI model that would outline the front end, the back end, the database, and how we're going to deploy this. I want to have a list of features and I want to start developing an MVP. Can you really go through this, ask me a bunch of questions, clarify everything that I need, and then create this spec document for me? I'd like to iterate with you back and forth. Okay, so what I've done here is I'm just giving this a long prompt. I'm going to go ahead and press enter. And by the way, if you're wondering what I'm using to dictate here, I'm using a tool called Whisper Flow. Notice how it gives me really fast, clean dictation with even like bullet points and formatting. I actually have a long-term partnership with them, so if you want to check it out, I'll leave a link to it in the description. You can try it out for free. Anyways, you can see that it's now asking me, hey, I want to start asking questions. Who exactly is the target user? Remember, that's the thing that we wanted to answer at the beginning. What is the core job to be done? What are we actually solving, right? What's the business model? Why would creators trust this? What's the project name? Any rough timeline? And I would go through this process with the model to be able to kind of create this detailed spec. So let me just fast forward a little bit here and I'll show you what a spec might look like. Okay, so I just had this create a sample spec so I can show you what it might look like, but you can see we have creator circle, MVP specification, overview, right, primary user, core job, non-goals, feature list, right? So these are the kind of things that I'm talking about, and it's also outlined the stack we're going to use for the front end, the languages we're going to use, etc. Now, if you're a developer, you'll have some more insight here. Otherwise, you can question the AI, ask it why it's decided on a particular stack, and you can start going over the trade-offs of, should I use Python? Should I use a separate backend? Should I use something like Postgres? Should I use Supabase, right? There's a lot of different options. I can't answer them all in this video, but the point is you need to think through this before you move to the next stage. Now, I want to move on to the next stages, but it is important to note here that obviously all of this is going to be a lot easier for you if you have at least some software development fundamentals. Now that's exactly where today's sponsor, Boot.dev, comes in. Now Boot.dev is one of the best learning platforms out there and my long-term partner. And one of the biggest problems I see when people are learning to code, especially in the era of AI, is boredom. They watch tutorials, copy code, feel productive for a week, and then they quit. Now Boot.dev takes a completely different approach. It's very hands-on, and honestly, it feels more like a game than a course. Now you're learning back-end development by actually building things, not just watching videos. You work through real challenges in Python, SQL, and Go, earn XP, level up, fight bosses, and progress through a full back-end curriculum. Now it sounds gimmicky, but it actually works because you're doing the same kind of problem solving that you do on the job. Now they also have an AI tutor called Boots, which doesn't just dump answers on you, it asks follow-up questions and helps you reason through problems when you get stuck, which is way closer to how you actually learn. Now, all of the content is free to read and watch, and if you want interactive coding, progress tracking, and AI help, that's part of the paid plan. If you want to check it out, go to boot.dev and use my code TECHWITHTIM to get 25% off your first year. Big thanks to Boot.dev for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back into it. So now we move on to stage 3, which is to set a realistic timeline. Now what I mean by this is you want to have some goals or milestones that you want to reach on a specific date. This is going to help keep you on track and make sure that you have a feeling of kind of fulfillment and accomplishment as you're going through what can be a pretty tedious and annoying process of building an application. So for me personally, on day 1, I like to have everything planned out. I like to have it specced out, I like to have my user stories, I like to have what I just showed you on screen in the previous stage. Then by day 2 or 3, I like to have at least the core of the application finished and have a kind of hacking, working prototype that I can run on my own computer that at least accomplishes one of the core goals. Then by week 1, I like to have a lot of the main features built out, and then weeks 2, 3, and 4, I like to fine-tune everything, add testing, and aim to have a fully complete product that real users could actually work with by the end of month 1. Now you can set any goals that you want, but by having a little bit of a roadmap and a timeline, it helps keep you on track. It makes it feel more like a professional project rather than just a random hacked AI thing that you're doing on your computer. So now we move on to stage 4, which is absolutely critical, and this is deciding how you want to build this application. Now there's 2 main routes you can go with. The first is to go with a no-code builder or kind of like a hosted AI platform. I'm talking about something like Lovable or Bolt or Replit, right, or Mocha or something along those lines. Option 2 is to build it yourself using AI tools like Cursor, for example, or Claude Code or Codex that are a lot more advanced but also give you a lot more control. So the first thing you need to understand in this stage is what type of application are you building? If you're just building a simple website like a landing page, something that doesn't have users or authentication or deep backend integrations, then you're probably best just to go with a platform like Lovable or any other no-code builder where it can host the site for you, it can build everything, you don't need to run it locally on your computer, and you genuinely can be a complete expert and get something up and running very, very quickly. Now, a lot of times with these no-code builders, they are great for prototyping and getting something up fast, but when you want to have a complex, long-running project, they can be a little bit limiting, and many times you end up taking it off of that builder and hosting it yourself, so you have a lot more control, you can hand it to a real dev team, you get the idea. So if you're not technical at all, this is the option I would go with, and I would start looking through platforms like what I mentioned. So V0, Mocha, Lovable, Bolt, right, etc. See which one works best for your specific use case, and then roll with that. Now, option 2 is to build this yourself. Like I mentioned, using something like Claude Code, Codex, Cursor. Now these are going to be more complicated, but ultimately give you a lot more control. So if you are already comfortable reading code, if you're okay, running a few commands, executing an environment on your computer, running something like a Docker container, if you know even what that is, then I would definitely go with this route because you are going to have a lot more control. You're going to have a deeper understanding of what the code is doing, and ultimately you'll probably have a more sustainable product long term that can be, again, just a lot more complex and advanced. But those are the two routes. You need to decide which one you want to go with, and then we move on to stage 5. So stage 5 is to set up your environment. Now this is only going to be applicable if you chose kind of option 2 in stage 4, where you're going to be building this yourself using something like Cursor, Claude Code, whatever. But if you are in that stage, then there are a few things that you're going to want to set up. Now first, you're going to want to make sure you have Git installed on your computer, or version control. Now, this is a way where you can actually checkpoint and save all of the different progress that you're making on your application, so that if something goes wrong, you can roll back, and you can have this stored securely in the cloud so you can access it from any device. You're also going to want to install things like Node.js. You're likely going to need this as a runtime for whatever type of web application you're building. You may have other dependencies that you need. For example, if you're building a game or a mobile app, you're going to have to set all of that up on your machine. Then after that, probably the most important thing you'll need to set up is some kind of coding editor or IDE. Now you're going to want to pick one of the AI editors that's out there right now. You could use simply Claude Code, you could use Cursor, you could use Anti-Gravity, you could use Tray. There's a lot of options here, and I would recommend that you play around with each of them, see which one fits into your budget range, because some can be more expensive than others. For example, Claude Code is going to be very expensive relative to something like Tray, which is a lot more kind of free to use, and based on the complexity and user interface that you like. For me, I like working inside of a VS Code-like environment. You might not know what that means, but this is a popular open source code editor. So I typically prefer to use Cursor because I can read all of the files, I can edit them manually. However, if you just kind of want to more vibe code this application and you don't want to be reading through all of the code, you might prefer to use something that's more terminal-based like Claude Code, right? It's kind of up to you, and you should do a little bit of due diligence, look through the options, and then set up 1, 2, or 3, play with them, and see which one you like the best. I'll give you some suggestions later, but generally that's what you need to do. Now, once you've chosen the kind of agentic editor that you want to be using, you also want to start installing some MCP servers. MCP servers allow your editor to go interact with other tools, for example, Notion or GitHub or Google Drive, or pull live documentation from the web. Now, based on what you're building, you'll want different types of MCP servers, but for example, if you want to have some AI-generated videos or images in your app, you may want to connect to Nano Banana Pro, right, where it can actually go and generate those for you and then pull them into your application. If you don't want to run Git and GitHub commands manually, you may want to connect to the GitHub MCP server so it can automatically create your repository, push code up for you. You get the idea. I can't go through all of the options here, but generally there's a few great integrations that you can add into your existing tool stack that you're using, so that it's just going to make your life a lot easier, and taking a few minutes to set them up before you start building is always worth it, so I'd recommend doing a little bit of research there. Last thing, I would recommend learning about that agentic tool that you're using. A lot of them have some more advanced configuration options. For example, long-term memory. You can create things like Claude.md files or cursor rules, or various kind of conventions where you can tell the app how to behave when you're using it for a long period of time, so you don't need to keep reminding it of the coding stack you're using, or a convention, or the name of your application, or you get the idea. I'm not going to go through everything here, but you want to set up your tools, set up your environment so you're ready to code. Now, stage 6 is to pick your budget and select a model. Now, within each AI agent tool that you're using, you can usually select different AI models. Some are more expensive than others, some are more capable than others, and you want to make sure that you use the right model for the right job. So for example, if you have a completely unlimited budget and you don't care how much it's going to cost you to build this application, you probably just want to run with something like Opus 4.6. This is the current best frontier coding model. It's great at creating projects from scratch. It has some good creativity, and overall it's going to be very good at building your app. However, if you're not paying $200 per month for the Claude Max plan and you're using Opus on the $20 per month plan, that's going to cost you a lot of money and a lot of usage very quickly. And within just a few hours, you're probably going to be completely out. That would mean you're going to have to pay more, which can be quite expensive, or switch over to another model. Then we have, for example, the codex models, right, from GPT or from OpenAI. Now, these typically have a lot more usage. They're better at debugging and solving complex problems, but maybe not the best at spinning up an application completely from scratch. So you have to pick what type of models you want to be using, and again, how much money you're comfortable spending. If you're on a little bit of a lower budget, you may want to reach for a model like Minimax. The new M2.7 model is very good at coding. Again, not quite as good as Opus or the GPT 5.4 models. However, it's still very capable, and it's like 50 times cheaper than using something like Opus 4.6. There are obviously tons of other options, but generally speaking, you need to ask yourself, what are you comfortable spending? What kind of subscriptions do you want to purchase? Go look at the pricing. You'll see it's kind of all over the place. And what model do you generally want to be using? In my case, I typically use a combination of Opus 4.6, the newest Codex model, so I believe when I'm filming this video it's 5.4, and then a little bit of the Minimax models if I need something that's a little bit less complicated. And even within each of these companies, you can choose models that are less expensive. For example, if we talk about Anthropic, you could use the Sonnet model, which is still very good at general purpose tasks and not nearly as expensive as something like Opus. So just keep this in mind, switch between the different models, see how much they're costing, and really understand based on your budget which ones make sense to be using. And same thing if you go with the no-code options here, some of those subscriptions may seem cheap, but you want to look at how much it's going to cost to deploy, how much the credits cost, and what you're willing to pay on a month-by-month basis, because it can get quite expensive, especially if you have a lot of users coming on to this kind of no-code hosted platform. So now we move to stage 7, which is to build it slowly. Now, what I want you to understand at this point is that there's something called an MVP, or a minimum viable product. One of the major issues with building software products is something called scope creep, where you start building something, then you just add to it and add to it and add to it and add to it until eventually you have this monstrous application with so many different features and all these random things that introduce bugs and issues and problems that you never needed in the first place. This is why we started at the very beginning of the project by understanding what it is we actually wanted to build, what problem it was solving, and what done actually means. Generally speaking, when you build any type of software application, you want to build the minimum viable product first. That means you want to build the absolute minimum amount of features that allow this product to be usable. All great software companies have started this way, and this is exactly what you should aim to do, especially when you're building with AI. So really try hard here not to add a ton of features. Anytime you do want to make an addition to your application, ask yourself, is this absolutely necessary? Now, generally speaking, you want to follow this 5-step process. First, you want to get one feature working completely before you build anything else. Then you want to commit to Git consistently, so make sure that anytime you make a major change, you're saving that in your Git history so you can roll back to it if needed. Next, you want to test every single piece that you build before you move on to something else. So make sure that the feature you just worked on is fully finished before moving to the next stage, test it various times, and go through all of the edge cases that could exist. Step 4, you want to give AI small scoped tasks. Don't give it this full spec document and say, hey, build this entire application. You want to build it piece by piece, and you want to actually read the code. You don't need to write the code yourself, but you should at least read what the AI is doing, because AI projects can get out of hand extremely fast, and it's better to keep it as small as possible. The least amount of code you have in your project, the better. It's going to be more maintainable, there's going to be less bugs and problems, so it's going to be easier for you to actually understand what's going on. So really religiously stick to this MVP plan and build something that's usable before you go crazy. Then what you would do is you would validate that people actually want to use this application, and that the MVP is actually valuable, and only from that stage would you start adding additional features. Again, think of any software company in the world. They start with the absolute basics, they validate this is actually useful and people want it, and then they start rolling out a bunch of additional changes. Now, stage 8 is continuous deployment and continuous integration. Now, this is where it starts to become a little bit more of a developer project as opposed to just a pure AI generated project, where you want to start imposing some proper software development standards. What I mean by that is that as your code gets larger and larger, changes that you make in one place can affect other areas of the application without you know it. It's not viable for you to retest every feature in the application anytime you make a change, and that's why you start to really rely on automated testing. Now, when you start creating these AI projects, you want to have a testing plan in mind. How are you going to automatically test various pieces of code? What unit tests are you going to have? What integration tests are you going to have? And how are these going to run automatically? Now, at the very minimum, you want to have AI generate test cases for the core important pieces of your application. So authentication, extremely important that you have automated tests for that, right? The rendering of the important UI pages so the app doesn't crash. Very important that you have tests for that. You can test as much or as little as you want, but generally speaking, you need to test the core features of your application in an automated fashion and run those tests before you ever deploy something out. Now that leads us to deployment or continuous deployment. It is a huge pain in the ass to have to run 30 different commands in your terminal anytime you want to actually push a change to your users. That's why you should set up automatic deployments on specific branches in GitHub. Now, there's a great feature called GitHub Actions, which can automatically run tests and push deployments for you. It's a little bit too complex for me to just explain in this video, but the point is you want to think about this process, add continuous testing, add continuous deployment, and make sure that your app is stable and maintainable, because the most difficult part of software development is not building the app, it's maintaining it and making sure it doesn't break in the future. This is where you go from a hobby project to something that's actually a real professional developer application, and this part is something that most vibe coders don't even know exists and completely skip. Don't skip it, trust me, you need this. Now this leads me to stage 9, which is to deploy and monitor your application. Now this kind of goes hand in hand with stage 8, where you're setting up the automatic deployment, you're setting up the automatic integration and testing and all of that kind of stuff. But when we get to the deployment phase, you also want to make sure you're adding things like monitoring and logging, and that you understand how your app can scale and grow as more users come. This is why software engineers are still needed today, even in the era of AI development. And if you get to this phase where you're actually deploying your application, having real users use the app, you want to make sure you're tracking how those users are going through your application, bugs that they're encountering. You want to make sure you have proper versioning, all of that kind of stuff. So that's really what this stage is about. What happens once your app gets into the wild? How can you actually track and grab the analytics to make sure that you can improve it over time and see what features people are using or not using? This is valuable information and something every app needs. All right, so that's going to wrap up this 9-stage roadmap. I know that's a lot of stuff. It seems a little bit complicated, but ultimately, if you want to build a real production-grade application with AI, this is what's required in 2026. I'm sure it's going to get easier over time, but generally speaking, having some of those software development fundamentals is still very important, and following a structured process where you don't just randomly whip something up, but you go through the stages is going to save you a massive amount of time. It's going to feel like a lot of these things are a big waste of time at the beginning of your project because you just want to get something out there and build it quickly. But I assure you, as someone who's been in the industry now for over 10 years, spending a little bit of time up front will save you hundreds of hours down the line in the future. Please take my advice for it and don't make the same mistakes that I have. Follow this 9-step process. Anyways, I hope this video was helpful to you. If it was, leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.